Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. My name is Rafael Espinal. I am the President/Executive Director of the Freelancers Union. I'm really glad you could join us this evening for what I believe to be a very important discussion on a special race that's happening here in New York for the 12th Congressional District, which is currently represented by Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney. If you have seen the schedule, she is going to join us in a few minutes to speak about her candidacy, why she is the best representative for the district, and what her vision and her plans are coming into this next term. Many of you, as freelancers, have struggled over the past few months because of the COVID pandemic. We, as a union, have been working closely to understand how badly this pandemic has hurt the freelance economy and hurt you as individuals. We also worked very intimately with congressional members like Chuck Schumer to ensure that relief packages like the CARES Act included relief for the freelance workforce, like PUA, the PPP program, ensuring that those programs are working for you. But now we're in month 3, and while those programs were instituted, it wasn't instituted flawlessly. There were a lot of mishaps and issues that you have faced trying to reach the Department of Labor to qualify for PUA, trying to apply for the PPP program, and only to find out that funds have dried up. And these are all issues that I believe were caused because freelancers, in reality, I think, truthfully speaking, aren't prioritized when we're talking about the economy. Usually these programs work extremely well for larger corporations, for traditional small business, traditional employees. So I really hope that tonight we can talk about the importance of freelance workers being represented in the congressional level and all the levels of government, and making sure that when programs are being talked about and drafted, that they reflect the needs of the freelance workforce and work seamlessly for you. We understand that at this point, there are still many freelance workers that till this day have not been able to get any of the PUA payments. So, while Congress is currently talking about a new relief package and they're actually taking votes on, it would be interesting to hear from the Congresswoman and from other candidates about what they find to be important in those packages and how they'll help the freelance workforce as well. So with that said, I also want to say that early voting started this Saturday. I myself personally went out to vote today, got one of these stickers. So if you did not put in your application for an absentee ballot, you can walk from now to June 23rd to a polling site and vote early. If you did put in an application for an absentee ballot and are concerned about where it is in the mail, but do have the time to go out and visit an early polling site, you are able to do that as well. So we encourage you, just make sure you get your vote in, whether it be through absentee, whether it be through early voting, or whether it be on the traditional election day on June 23rd. Please, it's important that you come out, make your voice heard, and help us push legislators to understand that the freelance vote and the freelance economy is an important one to pay attention to and not take for granted. So with that said, I would like to bring in our Congresswoman from District 12. Just give me 1 second as she comes in. Congresswoman.
Theo?
How are you?
I'm fine. I'm not really feeling well. I thought I had COVID, but I was tested, and thank God I didn't have it.
Oh, thank God.
Thank God. I know so many people have told me they felt like they were going to die with it. Listen, congratulations on your new position. It's very important.
Thank you.
The bill to really support the gig workers, the independent workers, and we expanded unemployment to help them and all kinds of things. So that's really important. Congratulations.
Yeah, and we thank you for the work you've done in getting the CARES Act passed, especially the new relief packages that are being spoken about right now. So, Congresswoman, we'd just love to hear from you. Your history in Congress, why are you running for re-election? Why do you think this election is an important one for people to come out and vote for you. And, you know, how do you see the next 2 years, and especially now during this pandemic, you know, your role in speaking up for the freelance workforce, the gig workers, who traditionally have never been able to qualify for a lot of these worker and employment protection programs that exist, like unemployment insurance, all these other relief packages?
Okay, should I start now?
Yes, sure.
Okay, first of all, I want to thank you for inviting me and congratulate you on your new position. And I'm so pleased that the Democrats were successful when we negotiated the package for the heroes and for the CARES package, that we did a whole section that included the gig workers or independent contractors or independent workers, because now more than ever, more and more people are working in that area. And the Democrats historically have been the ones that have fought for the people, whether it's Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, or the Affordable Care Act, or the 9/11 Health and Compensation Bill from Maloney. I want to say we're in very trying times. Our city is facing the twin pandemics of coronavirus and police brutality. So we really need effective representation in Washington by people who can actually get things done. And that's why I'm so proud that I was recently endorsed by the New York Times and the Daily News and rated the #1 leader in Congress by GovTrack. And now, as chair of the Oversight Committee, I have an even more powerful voice on the issues that matter to you, including gig workers in legislation as we go forward. My record of accomplishments includes winning health care and compensation for the 9/11 first responders, and I now introduced the Pandemic Heroes Compensation Act to do the same thing for the essential frontline workers, and many of those essential workers are gig workers. I brought in over $10 billion for infrastructure for the 2nd Avenue subway, the Kosciuszko Bridge, connecting the Brooklyn and Queens part of my district, modernizing the L train, connecting Manhattan and Brooklyn, and many other efforts. And after years of effort on my part, we now have paid family leave for 2.1 million federal workers and for all of the victims of COVID-19. I'm working to get paid leave for everybody. And according to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, my CARD Act saves you, the consumer, over $10 billion a year by stopping deceptive, unfair credit card practices. And I'm trying to get even more money in your pocket with my overdraft protection bill that would halt that practice. I've also been a champion for progressive values and have been endorsed by the Progressive Caucus, the End Citizens United, the AFL-CIO, Planned Parenthood Now, Every Town for Gun Safety, the Stonewall Democratic Club, the Sierra Club, and every Democratic club in my district. So I want to say that I am running for re-election. I hope you'll remember to vote on Election Day, which is June 23rd. Early voting has already started, and you can also vote from your home by absentee ballot. And if you want more information on how to vote, you can go to carolynmaloney.com. And I have been a productive legislator. I get things done. And as Rafael knows, I helped negotiate with him getting the whole deal going with the Bushwick Inlet Park, where we got the mayor to help us buy the land. It's going to be a beautiful park right there on the waterfront. And I've got the Esplanade that I've worked for the waterfront in my area in Manhattan. And then in Queens, we had a great win in getting the money to beautify the waterfront there in front of Queensbridge Houses, which is the largest public development in the whole country. But a new area really is the gig workers and fighting to get their protections. And we got all kinds of protections in healthcare and in direct grants and in the unemployment and everything else. They have qualified for the unemployment insurance, and we got an additional $600 federal for that. And we had the direct payment from the IRS. We had them qualified for that. Now, if you have trouble accessing it, you can call my office and ask for help, but you have to be a constituent. I have people calling from all the other boroughs and everything else. I said, I represent Brooklyn and parts of Queens, Williamsburg and Greenpoint, and parts of Queens, Long Island City and Astoria, and then parts of the Upper East Side. So if you live in my district, my office will help you or direct you to your congressperson to help you get through the maze of applying for this money. But I think maybe our time would be better spent if I was answering your questions and hearing how I can help you on a federal level.
Yeah, thank you. Well, thank you, Congresswoman, for giving us a brief overview of all the great work you've done over the years. To talk about the CARES Act and the current stimulus packages being spoken of, one of the biggest issues we've seen is that even though a lot of these programs were tailored to work for freelancers, a lot of workers fell through the cracks either because the PPP program dried up because there wasn't enough funding in it, or because the state had a lot of issues with processing a lot of the unemployment claims that were coming in, given the high volume. So what I've heard a lot from our members was the need for Congress to pass a stimulus check, for example, like the check the $1,200 check that was passed earlier, for it to be a monthly check for Americans moving forward until the pandemic is over. Is that in conversation right now within Congress?
Well, if you're having trouble, as I said, call my office. Now, there's still money in PPP. As you know, we put more money in it because the money was all spent very quickly. So then we put more money in it, and then we just made some adjustments to it to make it more flexible. But the PPP program still has money in it if they want to apply for that particular program. And right now, we passed a $3 trillion bill. We're calling it the HEROES Act. And that has $1 trillion going to city and states. And if we don't pass it, then the mayor has told me there's going to be layoffs in New York City because the pandemic cost so much. But he says he has something like a $9 billion hole in his budget. And this would put $17 billion into the city of New York and help us keep from having to fire, firefighters and teachers and, other municipal workers that help our people. And what happened with that is that hadn't passed the Senate. Now, it's my hope that the HEROES Act, that has even more aid in a whole variety of areas and puts more money into the direct grants, the unemployment, the IRS grants, all the areas. We haven't gotten that through the Senate yet, but once that gets through, you have additional monies for the direct payments to people. And we're working hard to make that happen.
So like many New Yorkers and many Americans, freelance workers also are dealing with the issue of paying rents or their mortgage, right? And there's been a call, I think locally here in New York, about canceling rents. A lot of freelancers do live paycheck to paycheck in New York City because of how expensive it is to live here. Have you taken a position or have thoughts on?
Oh yeah, listen, in the bill, this is a federal program. There's several programs on the state level that are proposed, but in the bill we had a $100 billion rent relief package, which would go to renters, that couldn't make their payment. It would help make their payment. That's why that HEROES Act, to finally get it through, is so important. And also on the Financial Services Committee, I'm on that committee, I led a letter that we got a lot of members on that called on Fannie and Freddie and the FHFA, the unit that is the administrative unit over housing, to do a moratorium on any evictions or foreclosures during the pandemic, and they granted that. So that's my letter that did that. But we have the $100 billion program that we need. We got through the House, we now have to get through the Senate. Now in the New York State Legislature, there is a bill by Generis that freezes the rent, that you don't have to pay the rent. And then there's one by Lenthal and Kavanaugh that gives the renter a voucher that helps them pay their rent. So those are two bills that are pending before the New York State Legislature that have not passed. And then again, as I said, we have the bill that the Democrats put through, which is, basically $100 billion relief fund. I'm sure that's not enough. I'm sure if we could get it through, it'd probably go through that money like they went through the PPP money to begin with. But that relief is there on the federal level.
Great, thank you. Just one last question before we go. In New York City, we passed a law called the Freelancers and Free Act in the City Council, actually, and it was a law in which the city can now step in and help freelancers collect wages from clients who have not paid on time. And it's an important way in order for them to recoup the work that they've done, the money for the work that they've done. We've heard this a lot through the pandemic. A lot of workers who performed work in January and February, their clients were not paying and using the pandemic as an excuse, leaving these workers without the money they need to be able to pay their rent, put food on the table. As a union, we've been talking internally a lot about potentially getting Congress to pass a similar law across the country. Is that a law you think that would make sense to be taken up in the House? And
I think so. I read about it. I'd like to see the language of the City Council bill, and I'd like to look at it federally. I hear a lot of complaints from independent contractors and from the artists, the musicians, the people who work job by job. One thing that we have done that is helpful to them is made their insurance, their health insurance, portable so that it can go from job to job. But they're very vulnerable because people abuse them. They take their work and then they refuse to pay them. Now, federally, one of the ways we enforce things is with if there's federal money involved. Say, for example, there was you're building a school with federal money and they had a mural in the school that that an artist did, and then they did not pay the artist. This would enable the independent contractor or the artist to sue to get paid because it's federal money. I could work on a bill on the federal level. I think it's a very good idea. And I think it's also a group of people. When we included gig workers, I can't tell you how excited people were. I was invited on one talk about what it meant and how it was going to work. And we had over thousands and thousands of people try to get into the program. All these people told me they couldn't even get in because it was blocked. There were too many people coming in. So it shows that there's a real need for this organization, which I've never heard of before. Was it just created, or did you this organization you're running now, for the gig workers, the independent workers? So to make it a long story short, I think it's time for everybody to organize with your organization and working together. I look forward to working with you on seeing what they did on the city level and seeing if we can do it on the federal level. There's nothing now.
Great. Well, thank you, Congresswoman. I'll just leave one last thought before I allow you to give any closing remarks. We've been hearing a lot from musicians, especially. A lot of independent venues are barred from applying for some of these federal loans. Musicians feel that they're going to be on the last phase of recovery because of the fact that the pandemic is requiring us to be 6 feet apart. It's hard to put on music shows without the crowd. So it's just something I think is important for Congress to keep in mind as they move forward and talk about relief for freelance workers, especially musicians moving forward. So is there any last words you'd like to give to our members?
I think it's very exciting. I want to congratulate them for selecting you. You were one of our most outstanding public representatives, and it was a pleasure to work with you in Brooklyn on joint projects, particularly getting that park. I thought that was very exciting when we got that done. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity here, and I especially in curbing the abuse of people who you take their services and then they refuse to pay. And then it's very hard because you're a single person. How do you enforce it? And you can't go to court because the courts cost too much money and it takes forever. So it's sort of like they abuse you a lot of times. I hear from other artists and musicians and everything else. It's a hard field to begin with, and very difficult one. But then, you know, to get paid for your services, I think that's something I'd really like to work about on it. And I'm trying to figure out how we could make that work federally. I think you'd have to tie it to federal money. That's how we usually get into helping people across the states. There's a whole states' rights, city rights, you know, legislative field that's there. But I don't think that they could have a better representative than you, helping to spearhead the fights for them. And it's I'm excited about it. I'm excited about working with you and trying to figure out some of these answers. I will tell you, we passed an important bill called the Jobs Act, and in that we did all kinds of things to help independent contractors. And that I'm going to send over to you a copy of that bill to see how it can work with your organization to help others. Anyway, I thank you for having me tonight, and I miss seeing you. We're all quarantined. We used to see each other at meetings all the time. I never see anybody but the four walls, right? It's hard, but it's becoming better. I know I've been around the city some, and everybody's outside, and restaurants are all outside now, and putting everything up, and I don't see why we can't. You know, one thing I would work on is why can't we have music in the streets now?
Right.
You know, if since you can't go inside in phase one, why couldn't we have music on the streets on the outside in certain neighborhoods and places? So, I mean,
that's a great idea, and I'm sure a lot of musicians will love that idea, especially all New Yorkers. So
okay.
thank you, Congresswoman. We really appreciate your time and all of your work, and we're glad to hear that you're healthy and you're safe.
Oh, God bless. I mean, I pray for all of my friends and New Yorkers, because this disease is the worst thing I've ever seen. It's the worst thing we've been through, really. So God bless you, and thank you for your good wishes. Thank you.
Bye. All right, so that was Congresswoman Maloney. Up next, we have Peter Harrison, who is also running in this race. Peter has been a resident of New York for over a decade, and he is now running in that congressional seat. So we'd love to hear what his thoughts are, why he's running, and why does he feel it's important now more than ever to include freelancers' voice in the conversation. So we're gonna try to get Peter on. Peter, how are you? I think you're on mute, Peter.
Okay, is that better?
There you go. How's it going?
It's good, Rafael. Nice seeing you, man. Congratulations on the gig, as it were.
I appreciate it. I'm really glad you can join us. You know, and we'd love to hear why you decided to run. What is your campaign about? And how does the freelancers fit into the entire picture, especially now during this pandemic? You know, we as a union have spoken closely to our members and realized that over 80% of freelancers have reported to either have lost work or completely be out of work.
Yeah.
So a lot of the relief is dependent on what's being done in Congress. So we'd love to hear from you about what your vision is and the work you're doing, why you're running, and a little bit about you.
Sure. Yeah. Well, again, I really appreciate you putting this together. Thank you for your members for tuning in here. My name is Peter Harrison, and I am running for Congress in New York 12. I had been a resident of the district for 14 years, the last 11 of which have been in Stuyvesant Town and the East Village. I am a longtime housing activist with my tenants association there with the DSA, with Housing Justice for All. I'm also a policy riser. I was a senior housing advisor for the progressive think tank Data for Progress. I was actually a 1099 contract with them. I'm also the co-founder of 2 startup companies. And for many years within that and out that, I was contract as we were getting started there. And I am also a professor of information technology in the MBA program at Baruch College, where I'm a union delegate. So I'm one of the only, or the only other union member in this race. So the three things that I'm really running on, and I do think they have a lot to interact with your members on. First, of course, is housing. The New York 12 is 72% home renters. It's one of the highest concentrations of home renters in the country. Just like everything else, COVID has made existing problems much worse and expanding to more people. So I've been proud of having been an activist on the ground for the last 10 years through 3 different rent law fights. But I'm particularly proud of having worked for Data for Progress, where I got to advise on the presidential housing plans for Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, and former HUD Secretary Julian Castro. And most importantly, I was part of the Homes Guarantee, which is a grassroots national progressive plan to solve the sort of structural inequalities in the housing market, to protect renters, to make affordable home ownership a possibility for particularly the working class in cities, to end homelessness, to provide supportive housing, and to sort of address the deep systemic racism in the housing market. One of the other things that I'm very proud to have been a part of, I'm the first federal candidate anywhere to introduce a plan to make public transportation 100% free, accessible, and green. It's called the Freedom of Movement in America Plan. The idea here, again, if we're going to try to fight the climate crisis, 29% of our carbon emissions come from cars and trucks, and we cannot meaningfully address that unless we get people out of cars, take our streets back, and figure out ways to move more people through our existing infrastructure. This is a plan that has been worked on by a number of grassroots activists in the city. I'm proud to be the first one to organize it and pass it along. And then finally, and I think most pertinently, and we can segue into some of the stuff more specific to members, but I'm running on what I call the new economy of care. This is my experience as a longtime bartender, as an adjunct professor, not having a lot of employment security or consistency. Certainly being a 1099 contractor for many years at various think tanks and startups. This is something that's near to dear to me. But we do have the technology, we do have the productivity to have each worker get more reward for their labor. Unfortunately, we have such a bias towards investors, a bias towards the corporate class in our legal system and our tax system that we are very far behind there. Part of the resurgence of union activism, and certainly you guys are on the forefront of that, is running up against some of these really deep structural problems in our economy. So my plan is really, in addition to sort of the bigger progressive things we all support, single payer Medicare, universal child care, free education, canceling student debt, specifically the new economy of care, to me, kind of does acknowledge the reality here that employment is a more fluid experience for many people. I think a lot of people that aren't familiar with freelancers would say like, oh yeah, a graphic designer and maybe a musician. But reality is there are a lot of full-time employees at major tech firms, or they're delivery people that are these 1099 contractors that are full-time employees without any agency. And that's a massive part of our economy. I think it's a third of employees in New York City are roughly part of this gig economy. So the idea of transferring the amount of wealth creation that's happening in our economy away from the very tippy top of it down into the labor pool, giving more agency for workers to organize, that's really been the core of my thing. So homes, workers, and cities has been certainly my focus. But I guess I want to talk quickly. I know Congresswoman was on here earlier talking about some of the CARES Act. So I'd happy just to touch base quickly, kind of my thoughts about that, what I thought worked or what didn't, if you want to, get into it.
I'm actually going to get into that. As I mentioned earlier, the CARES Act has left a lot of folks going through the cracks. UI, PUA turned out to be a disaster for the most part because of the backlog the state was dealing with. The PPP program has also left a lot of independent contractors out because small businesses were prioritized, or larger corporations as well. There has been a lot of internal conversations between members and within the freelance community about what other sources of programs support can a new relief package create, like a monthly stipend, right? Something where every resident, every working person gets a check to be able to get through the pandemic. The conversation around canceling rents. So we would love to hear what are your thoughts and your opinions and your positions on those issues.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess to start off, I do want to acknowledge that the unemployment benefits, that extra bump at the federal level was a pretty remarkable thing. It's kind of the bubble gum holding a lot of this together. Unfortunately, it's going to expire at the end of July. The fact that contract workers were included in this in the first place, as I'm sure you all know, is just an incredible move of the political football that really would not have been something, I think, on the radar for a lot of people. So I do give credit where some of those programs did pretty quickly expand the worker pool. But again, that gets to the point of Congress and the federal government knows the unemployment insecurity of a massive amount of our economy. And outside of COVID, they haven't done enough to sort of reorient that and make sure our labor is rewarded. So the fact that there was some language and some really meaningful protections, although be temporary, put into the CARES Act and sort of with the HEROES Act, that's great, but it just shows you how behind Congress is on these issues. To your point specifically, I think the universal basic income is particularly valuable right now. A lot of industrialized countries have been doing that. There was no need to lose 40 million jobs in this country. That was a systemic failure of our government to respond to things like this. It should have been easy, but as you see in Florida, you see in some of these places, so much unemployment insurance is moralizing and patronizing. They don't want it to work. They don't want it to be enough. And those systems really ran up to a massive event here. So I think from a baseline, what the federal government should be doing and should have been doing months ago is having these kind of universal guarantees on the back end. Absolutely a basic stipend, whether it's, again, adjusted through payroll protections and revenue structures, that's relatively easy to put together through IRS filings. That covers even undocumented employees if we went that route. Cutting a check specifically to individual workers, making sure undocumented workers and sort of more informal economy workers, that's harder to put together given the congressional structure. That's something we should be doing in the long term. But the thing dear to my heart is, of course, cancel rent. I've been a housing activist for a long time. Help the homeless guarantee. If I could do my name right, I was on my phone because I had some issues with my computer. I'd have Pete cancel rent Harrison on this. It's just, it's unconscionable that we had an entire collapse of revenue and income for people, for businesses, for homeowners, for home renters, and we didn't do more to that. Representative Maloney talked about the $100 billion sort of floating around there hypothetically. That's still, of course, nowhere near the amount of coverage that folks need for mortgages, for utilities. The eviction moratorium, of course, ends next week on June 20th. It's going to have just a second wave of evictions that are going to be absolutely brutal. Of course, the congressional stipends are going to end at the end of July. So not only did we not fix the health crisis here, and obviously we're seeing some spikes there, but the economic crisis, we got the worst of both worlds here, Rafael. We got the worst that we didn't cover anything in terms of healthcare. We didn't buy ourselves time with the shutdown to put contact tracing, to put isolating and every other sort of testing infrastructure to really manage this process and safely reopen, start and stop the economy. And then on top of that, we lost millions of jobs that are not going to come back. We lost many, many small businesses. We're already feeling a pinch with the corporate consolidation in our economy. So it really was a double whammy here. So Congress is an outlier in the sort of developed world of not having enough in place to protect people on the health side and protect the economy on the other side. So it's very easy for me as a congressional candidate to sit here and say what Representative Maloney should have done, but it is a structural failure of our political system to not have these types of things in place. And just like so many other issues, whether it's police brutality, like COVID has just put a spotlight on a lot of these insecurities. And we do, at the end of the day, just need new leadership down there because folks that have been there for a very long time are not fighting for these issues, are not thinking creatively for what this new economy is going to look like. And I think that's where I come in with my experience as a co-founder, someone who ran the CUNY Startups Accelerator, someone who teaches information technology, someone who's had many experiences as a freelancer, as an adjunct in Secure. So I'm much more illustrative, I think, of a lot of folks, not just in NY-12, in New York, across the country, in our generation of workers. So we need more representation like that in the Congress.
Right. So, you mentioned that you were a freelancer in your time. Portable benefits, right? Unemployment insurance has been expanded for the first time to the independent workforce. We talk about health insurance being a big deal, right? The cost of health insurance. Your thoughts on whether or not unemployment and other portable benefits should be a right for independent workers moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, and I was really excited to be on this this forum, and I know we only have a couple of minutes here, but I've really spent a lot of time talking about this, both as a union member myself and as someone who works in technology and studies technology. I think the larger conversation here, and it's not one campaign or one cycle, but the larger conversation is readjusting the expectation of labor and capital in this country. The idea of creating universal health care, a basic income, a social safety net that includes housing as a right, education as a right, would fundamentally change the need for unions. And it wouldn't just diminish them, but so much, I'm sure, and I've obviously looked at your site over the years, so much of it is organizing around healthcare. It's a very expensive cost for independent workers. And that's really, I think, the genesis of why collecting as many workers together as possible. But once you have a single payer Medicare for all program and you take that cost off, there's so many more creative ways for labor unions to organize and to fight for a bigger piece of the economic pie. And I think that's something that probably, I wouldn't say it gets lost in this sort of resurgence of union organizing, but I think that should be the goal of it, right? And that's why there's been so many divisions locally of labor movements, and Amazon headquarters was a really good example of this. Like, we're in a zero-sum game here, and you've got unions that see some jobs potentially dangling from an Amazon and they go after it, whereas obviously third-party contractors and warehouse workers and Amazon aren't protected. So these kind of divisions are not going to stop until we do kind of get that progressive agenda of education, housing, Medicare for all. These types of things have to be a blanket, when then unions can start fighting for more sector level engagement and sharing of profits and protections.
Well, thank you, Peter. Any last thoughts? We have one more minute. You want to close out by saying anything to our members?
Yeah, I just want to say, vote on June 23rd. You can vote early, vote absentee if you're in New York 12. I have been on the ground here for a very long time fighting for many of the issues that your members and you folks are experiencing, because I've experienced them myself, and I'm sure I'll experience them again. So we need to think big. We need to act big here. Everything that's happened the last couple of weeks with the Black Lives Matter protests, everything that's happened with COVID, is an opportunity to really talk about these things at a big structural level. But you do need people that understand these issues, have written the policies behind it, and have the receipts for it. And I'm definitely that person. So we'd love your support, but please stay safe and keep doing what you're doing in your power.
Thank you, Peter. Pleasure meeting you. Pleasure seeing you.
Yeah, man. See ya.
All right. Bye. All right, great. Well, that was Peter Haverson, who is running in Congressional District 12. He gave us a brief overview of what important issues he thinks that that Congress should be taking on, and he's going to prioritize moving forward. So up next we have Suraj Patel. Suraj, some of you may know him because he ran 2 years ago. Came very close in that race, so he's deciding to run again. Someone who I know is very, very energetic and very, very engaged in the district. So we'd love to hear from him on why he's running and his view and his thoughts on what Congress should be doing supporting the freelance workforce moving forward. How you doing, sir?
Hey, Rafael. Sorry about that. I was sitting for a few minutes and then realized, shit, I walked away. Shoot. Sorry. How's it going, brother?
Doing good. I'm doing good. Staying busy. We have a lot of work on our plate. As you know, when we've have seen a huge part of the freelance workforce have been negatively impacted because of the pandemic. A lot of people have been out of work or with little work to do. They've had issues with the unemployment insurance here, especially in the state of New York. PPP programs weren't working for them. So I think the members are really concerned about what the future looks like for them and what sort of relief packages are going to be on the table moving forward to ensure that those that fell through the cracks don't have to worry again on having to jump through hoops to be able to get the relief they need to pay rent, put food on their table, and just get by in our city, as you know, which is a very expensive city.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, guys. And I really, really appreciate the opportunity. Let me just say that the freelancers, you're not just a political group to me, you're my friends. The bulk of my friends are in this part of the district, in my part of the district, in Greenpoint, Williamsburg, Long Island City, Lower East Side, East Village. I mean, I myself was a freelancer for a while, right? So I completely understand. And as a professor of ethics at NYU, I teach about assent, benefit, and control. I teach about sort of the safety, the modernizing of our employment laws to extend the safety net to folks that are freelancers. So I'm very glad that the CARES Act included the provision to allow freelancers to access the enhanced unemployment insurance, but that should just become a permanent feature of the unemployment program. And I think we also need to look at things like providing, given that you don't have unemployment insurance as a freelancer or someone re-entering the economy, let's call it graduating from college and looking for a job, leaving incarceration and looking for a job seeker's allowance that would function like an unemployment insurance while you're looking for a job for freelancers, particularly because you aren't unemployed in those times. Now, this is a really important issue because the next decade in New York is going to require leaders who understand how to operate, a small business, understand the plight of what COVID has wreaked upon us in terms of the economic damages. And for someone like me, I graduated from law school in 2010, and I graduated in the worst economy ever until now, probably. And my family's businesses, which started as a small family immigrant business and still is a small family immigrant business, faced 7 bankruptcies coming right out. And I had to work for a year and a half without pay to make payroll for all these folks in our hospitality company. And so I know what it's like to make payroll when times are tough. And I know how inadequate the PPP program was. I know how inadequate the PPP program was for minority and women-owned businesses. That's because it worked through a financial system that's already inadequate for minority and women-owned businesses, and certainly for freelancers. So we've got to do a lot of structural reform to update our existing labor laws and to federalize some of the things that at least New York does right. We need a federal version of the Freelancers and Free Law, right? And we need support for folks as they transition between jobs. But right now, frankly, we're going to need a sustained support system in the economy. That's why I'm supporting a UBI type monthly check until triggers are met for the economy in terms of unemployment and things like that. And I know how hard you have been hit, guys, because this, many of you are graphics designers and artists. Many of you are, actors and things like that as well on the side, and as a primary job. And so we've done town halls around these folks, tip workers, gig workers, et cetera. And so I'm here for you.
Oh, thank you, Suraj. I really want to hit on some points. I think Pete was just finishing up on the Black Lives Matter movement. I think there are a lot of times, I think generally, there is a notion that freelancers are majority folks that are white, and that people of color don't freelance, right? And what we've seen and what we know, like any other sector of the economy, people of color, there's a lot of disparities in pay. There's a lot of disparities in workplace harassment. When we talk about misclassification, do you have any idea or policy plans or just kind of overall sentiment and feelings of what we should be doing on a congressional level to deal with the misclassification and also the need to provide more support for people of color who are freelancing?
Absolutely. So first off, let's say full stop, this is the cause of our time. We cannot tolerate another Black person being murdered by the police in a system that has been built over 400 years of white supremacy, and one that's been carried out and continued by the incumbent congressperson throughout her entire 28-year tenure in office, doubling and tripling down on tough on crime. Let me add, I ran for Congress 2 years ago. I was the only one running for Congress 2 years ago in a primary when everyone thought it was crazy. And one of the reasons I did is because I ran centralizing criminal justice reform and Black Lives Matter. And I might be the only person on earth that is either stupid enough or had the guts to send a mailer to the Upper East Side of New York that said Black Lives Matter in bold letters. Now, I was 2 years ahead of my time. At the time, Representative Maloney refused to say it. In fact, there was a debate with her where she instead somehow pivoted to the position of talking about how great Ray Kelly would be as Trump's FBI director, if that tells you anything about where the incumbent stands on this issue. So first and foremost, I'm a proud supporter of Black Lives as well. And what I think we have to do in both cases, again, is to extend employment protections to freelancers, extend freelancers and free federally. I think that California has a nice model law for the classification test that we can federalize or attempt to federalize as well. All of those things should impact our Black freelancers just as much as anybody else. And then I have a lot of plans to close the racial wealth gap. One of the things that we proposed or signed on to is Cory Booker's Baby Bonds plan, which starts to close generational wealth gap, especially with regards to race. Look, I'm in the most unequal district, one of the most unequal districts in the United States of America. And it's also one of the most segregated. Those two things go hand in hand with each other. You had a 1.5 times higher likelihood of dying from COVID if you live in public housing in this city than if you live in regular housing in this city for the same disease. You know, so poverty is now becoming a death sentence in our country and has been for a long time, and it's related directly to race. And, you know, the people, we do ourselves a disservice, Rafael, if the people who had a hand in creating and sustaining that unjust system are the same ones who we expect then to grow to fix it. This is why I think this is the change election of all change elections.
Great, thank you so much. So just one last question. Student debt, huge issue, right, across the board. I think it's one issue that a lot of freelance members deal with, right? You know, freelancers do need support in being able to deal with these huge debts that they carry. You know, these are folks that are going job to job, you know, trying to, you know, get as many jobs as possible to be able to stay afloat, especially in a city as expensive as New York. It's an extra burden, one that's being talked about mostly in a lot of left and progressive campaigns about canceling. What is your position on student debt, and what do you think you can do at a congressional level to ease that burden?
Well, I think first off, I want you to know that, you know, we really think through these issues and not just sort of copy and paste people's platforms on them. So first off, I'm for the eradication of student debt, but that can't be a one-off thing that we then don't fix going forward. So we're for K through 14 plus debt-free education, which covers the costs of college and tuition, community college, et cetera, right after high school and vocational school and things like that. And includes the ability to have a living stipend as well. Then we have to reform the education system so that for-profit colleges, which account for 70% of our student debt problem in this country right now, are eradicated. First off, it's a fraud. Trump University is a fraud, and that's the biggest bulk of our problems. Yeah, so those two things I support. And then finally, let me say that for professional school and graduate school debt, I support implementing a model of the Australian system. That is a system that will not require you to make debt service payments until you've found a stable job or an income. And then even then, it is capped at a percentage of your income. So the amortization is modifiable and extended. Those are the kinds of things we need to do so that we're not just eradicating debt, but we're not building it back up again.
The Paycheck Protection Program, I'm not sure if you're well versed on it, but it was a program that you know, provided a loan for payroll. You know, you were able to qualify up to $100,000 per employee as a freelancer. That was yourself to be able to pay, you know, your own costs and your own salary. But what we found was that a lot of freelancers, independent contractors had a tough time accessing the program. One, because the program was opened up to small businesses a week in advance before independent contractors were able to apply for it. Two, there was a lack of funds. And three, I would say that a lot of the smaller banks and underbanked communities and communities of color did not have access to those loans and were not made available to workers in those communities. What is your thoughts on that process, and how do you think we can fix that moving forward?
Yeah, so the PPP program is something that just goes to show you how broken Washington is in the first place. The people who fund these people's campaigns, corporations, big banks, that's why these programs are always tilted first to bail out them. And so, so many in the first CARES Act, so many small businesses and independent contractors did not receive any of their PPP money because it went all to these big corporations, things like that. Now, the problem with that is because it's magnifying the inequities in our financial system as it is. Minority and women-owned businesses, small businesses don't have as much access, and marginalized communities don't have as much access to the traditional banking system. And when you implement a program via the channel of the traditional banking system, what do you think is going to happen, right? You basically magnify it. And so what I'm supportive of is, first off, authorizing the Federal Reserve to create a bank account for every single American, every single person. And that means if you're, when you have the baby bonds program I talked about to close the racial wealth gap, things get deposited directly to people's bank accounts that are authorized by the Fed. That 25% of people that are unbanked or underbanked in the United States of America should be then added to that group. So that's where I'm at with that. The PPP program needed significant modification, including flexibility on what it pays for. Payroll is obviously a major part of a business expense, but so is rent, utilities, sales taxes, etc. And a June 30th arbitrary deadline to turn that into a grant versus a loan for rehiring doesn't make any sense when we're still not anywhere near reopening in the full sense, which is why, by the way, I was the first campaign long before Congress ever talked about it to introduce the first universal testing program, which is in Wired magazine. I published it early April, wrote it end of March when I had COVID myself. And the reason I did is because I know that without universal testing, we face a perpetual cycle of infection caseload spikes and reclosing of the economy. And that's not a sustainable way for any of us, including our freelancers, to live.
Yeah, well, thank you, Suraj. Any last words you want to give to our members before you go?
Yeah, guys, send one of your own to Congress. I mean, this is one of those situations in which clearly I count on the support of freelancers and folks who are working multiple jobs and things as a base, more or less. We have a real strong opportunity for the first time ever to elect a true progressive in the New York's 12th district. We have the momentum in this race. Rafael Maloney is now self-funding at this point to the tune of a couple $100,000, $300,000 now. And we feel like we're in a remarkable position to pull off the win after coming really close 2 years ago. So I encourage you to please make sure you vote June 23rd and vote for me.
Thank you, Suraj. Lots of luck.
Thanks, Rafael. And thanks, everyone.
Take care. Stay safe. Stay healthy.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye. Well, that was Suraj Patel up next. And our final candidate who's running in this race, we have Lauren Ashcraft, who should be joining us any second now. Lauren, how are you? You might be on mute. Hello? You might be on mute.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, don't worry. It always happens to me.
Thank you so much.
No problem. Well, thanks for joining us, Lauren. It's a pleasure to meet you.
It's a pleasure to meet you too, and thank you for everything you do and stand for and fight for.
Thank you. So tell us a little bit about yourself. I read a little bit about your history. Very interesting story. Please introduce yourself to our members. Tell us why you're running, and why do you see this race an important one, but also how do you see this role an important one, especially to fight for freelancer rights, independent workers, gig workers?
Absolutely. So I actually have been a freelancer gig worker myself. I'm a stand-up comedian who's used my art to help our community, help recruit volunteers and raise awareness around people who need food, people who need housing, and protecting civil rights. So I have been paid in every type of way possible, and all of the comedy community and artist community, gig worker, freelancers, and myself have in common is that we understand what it's like to have to constantly fight for wages, for our rights, and that's why I'm so thankful that that this union exists. And to be quite frank, I just joined it myself. Very proud to be a new member. But I'm running in New York's 12th Congressional District for Congress, and I'm running because our district is the third most unequal district in the entire country. And that means that in New York's 12th, we're home to Billionaire Row, but we're also home to thousands of people that sleep on the street every single night. And also home to so many people that are choosing between having a home and having food on their table. And especially with the coronavirus, and thank you also for everything you've done to raise awareness around how to get the help and protection that you need at this time. There are so many people struggling in our district to pay rent. There are 23,000 people in our district that have no health insurance at all. And we shouldn't have to be making these types of decisions of choosing between a house and food. I'm fighting for Medicare for all, fighting for a Green New Deal. I'm fighting for workers' rights, for true criminal justice reform, and I'm fighting for our government to finally prioritize us over profit. So I especially look forward to partnering with unions such as yours in fighting for freelancers to have the same rights as everyone else, but we can also, I hope, partner together and push for even expanded rights, expanded workers' rights, which is also a very personal issue for me. I come from a family of hardworking people, and my grandfather was killed by corporate greed in a coal mining accident. So workers' rights, workers' safety, disability rights, everything along the lines of what Freelancers Union is fighting for is exactly overlapping with my platform, and really appreciate you having me here tonight.
Oh, thank you for joining us. So, Lauren, and you mentioned that you're a freelancer, you're a comedian, you've been paid in all different types of ways. What do you believe are some of the challenges freelancers are facing right now, especially through this pandemic?
Absolutely. So the last freelance gig that I have, I was helping my church do fundraising and digital marketing, and they closed during the pandemic, and I lost all of my income. And that is a very common problem for freelancers at this time, and always as well, is that we need paycheck protection, and we need security around our jobs so that that doesn't happen. And I'm incredibly lucky to be in a domestic partnership where my partner is providing me with health insurance. Otherwise, I wouldn't have it at all. So whenever I fight for single payer Medicare for all, it's I'm fighting for freelancers and workers to have one less thing to have to worry about how they're going to get, how they're going to pay for. And, you know, the assistance and stimulus that our federal government has provided to small businesses and workers is not enough. We have so many families that are surviving off of a $1,200 check if they even received it from March. And again, 71% of our district is renters. So we have so many families on the verge of homelessness right now with no way to pay for their housing and rent. And I am fighting to make sure that everyone's on a level playing field, and you don't have to worry about you know, becoming homeless, because housing is a human right. And I also believe that healthcare is a human right, which is why I'm fighting for Medicare for all as well. And another huge part of my platform is making sure that I stand with unions and that we strengthen the organizing rights of workers across this country, and make sure that we also understand a lot of the rights that we take for granted, like a 5-day work week or our holidays that we get paid. These are all things that unions have fought very hard for. And together, in partnership, we still have a very long way to go in terms of making sure that everyone has the protection and rights that they deserve.
Definitely. So just to pivot back to the pandemic and how it's hurt workers, freelancers, especially now, with the inability to be able to pay their rent and pay a lot of the bills. Where do you stand on the conversations around canceling rents, rent relief, mortgage relief? What role do you think Congress can play, and do you support canceling rent?
Absolutely. I support canceling rent. And I know that there's concern around if you're a small landlord, what does that mean for you? I think that question and support should come from the federal government, and that the federal government should be making sure that everyone can keep their home and isn't racking up months and months worth of debt that they're unable to pay their rent. And then suddenly, whenever they are able to go back to work and earn a paycheck, that would just be sucked away into back paying your rent. So I am fighting for cancel rent, cancel mortgages at this time. And small businesses like small landlords should get the type of assistance they need to also survive as a business from the federal government, not from rent at this time.
Misclassification is a major issue, especially for freelancers of color. The gig workers across the country. California has passed a bill called AB 5, which was being discussed here in New York as well. But I do know that on the federal level, there is a version of this bill that is being considered. But the goal of the bill, right, is to provide justice for those workers who are being misclassified and being denied the rights to all of the benefits that the traditional worker gets. So I would love to hear your position on or your views on this classification, but also one of the other issues that some of our members are having is that the bills that were passed, they were written they were written in a way that made it difficult for a freelancer that considers themselves a sole proprietor, independent worker, from being able to get work because of the ABC test. How do you think we find a nice balance in making sure that people aren't misclassified, but also those freelancers that are freelancing as their own right, as their way to make an income, are not negatively impacted by the laws?
Absolutely. And I support those bills that penalize employers for misclassification. But I also believe that, especially at the federal level, we have to push for freelancers to have the same workers' rights and benefits as regular employees, such as Medicare for all, that would apply to all of us, paid time off, medical leave, sick leave, all of those things should be guaranteed to you as a worker, no matter what your classification. And so there wouldn't be, if everyone was on that level playing field and had the rights that they deserved, then there wouldn't be that incentive from the employer to misclassify, because they wouldn't be saving any kind of money. But if they continue to misclassify, they absolutely should be penalized.
Right. So I'm going to give you two more questions before we go. Wage protection. I'm sure, as you know, as a comedian, and as a freelancer, there are a lot of instances in which clients don't pay, or you're left waiting for months to get paid. In New York City, we passed the Freelancers and Free Act. It's actually the first bill in the nation, or probably still is the only bill in the nation, in which freelancers are able to call the city of New York 311 to help enforce the contract by finding the client, by finding the client and enforcing it and then putting pressure to ensure that the freelancer is paid at the end of the day. What are your views on something that being passed on a federal level?
Absolutely. No, and the Freelance Isn't Free Act is a wonderful step, and also an example that should be replicated at the federal level. And I have been cheated out of being paid multiple times as a comedian in the past, so it is something that's very personal for me as well. But the fact that legal damages would be covered, and you would be compensated for having to represent your lack of these wages in court, and you would be paid. And there is a requirement for a contract and there is a period of time where you have to receive that money. That is a wonderful protection that we absolutely should expand to the federal level. And absolutely, the companies and entities that cheat workers out of wages should pay the price. And absolutely, the Freelance Isn't Free Act is the direction we should move in.
Great. So, you know, where there's a big movement around Black Lives Matters. A lot of Americans, a lot of New Yorkers taking the streets to be able to fight for the rights of our Blacks friends and neighbors. What do you feel is an important step that Congress should take or bill in order to deal with police brutality moving forward? And do you have any insight on that or any bills you will support?
Absolutely. Thank you for this question. And we are in the middle of multiple crises right now. Obviously, the pandemic and an economic crisis, still in the middle of the climate crisis, which is affecting us all. And we are seeing the effects of passive leadership and what it's allowed in police brutality against Black people. And so I have been out on the street almost every single day in solidarity with my community, have stopped traffic with the people of Queensbridge and Long Island City, and very proud to stand with the Black Lives Matter movement. At the federal level, I am calling to defund the police. And that means from the federal level, we need to stop the military weapons and equipment from flowing to the local police forces. And that also means defunding the military industrial complex. So stopping the fact that we dump so much money into our military and we have fields and fields of tanks that no one's ever touched, while there are people across this entire country who are dying because they're starving. There are homeless people, there are people without health insurance. It's all so backwards, and we're throwing our money at exactly the wrong things. So we need to stop that flow of military equipment to local police forces. We also have to stop the funding, which often comes in the form of grants from the federal government when local police forces adopt national priorities, which often revolve around the war on drugs, which is based on racism, which I talk about quite a lot. So we need to stop that flow and also look ourselves in the eye and end this war on drugs. I'm calling for decriminalizing all drug usage anyway, legalizing cannabis and psychedelics. And instead, with all that money that we waste and hand to police, and that money and all these resources are used to brutalize people of color, with that money instead, we should fund, education, youth, jobs. We should fund mental health care, single payer Medicare for all. We should make sure that there's nobody that sleeps on the street. So there's so many better things we can do with that money. We have to stop that flow completely. And I also support the movement to defund police at the state and local levels as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much. Any last words or last statement you want to leave to our members?
Oh, I also just wanted to say I really appreciate your fight for disability insurance and accessibility, disability rights. It is a very personal thing for me, just because I did grow up as a caretaker for my grandfather, who is a quadriplegic. And I see we live in one of the richest cities in the whole world. And our city is set up in a way that people with disabilities can't use our public transit system in the same way as everyone else. People aren't able to work in the same way as everyone else. And if you rely on Social Security disability, you're also relying on maybe $700 per month to pay your rent and put food on your table. So I really do look forward to partnering with Freelancers Union to protect freelancers with disabilities. And there's so much work to do, and all of these issues are so intersectional. But the fact that you and this group are working so hard to fight for workers' rights and safety gives me an immense amount of hope, and I am very excited to work together with you.
Well, thank you, Lauren. We really appreciate that. We wish you a lot of luck. We know it's going to be a grueling week. So good luck. Pleasure meeting you. We'll be in touch.
I look forward to it. Thank you so much. Stay safe, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. Well, thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us. As you saw, we were joined by Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney. We were joined by Peter Harrison, Suraj Patel, and Lauren Ashcraft, who are all running in that race for the 12th Congressional District. As we know, now more than ever, we need to have a congressional leader who is going to take freelancers' issues at heart. This pandemic has only highlighted the need for there to be someone who understands what the issues are, the freelance community, and how the programs should be in place in order to work for us. So encourage everyone to come out to vote. Early voting started this past Saturday. The election day is the 23rd of June, which is next Tuesday. So you have a time window which you can come out to vote. And if you haven't, or if you have already mailed in for a absentee ballot, if it has come into the mail already, please cast your vote, mail it in. If you have not received it yet, or wondering when it's going to come in and are concerned that you won't receive it on time, you can walk to a poll site near you and vote early before election day, just in case you can't go on the 23rd, which is Tuesday. I voted already. It was easy. It took me less than 5 minutes to do. So we encourage you to come out, make your voice heard, and show that freelancers are concerned about what's happening on a federal and a state level. There are races happening on all levels of government, and we need you to come out to vote. So thank you all. Thanks for joining us. Hope you guys have a good night. Stay safe, stay healthy. We're here to support you. We're here to help you. If you're having any issues with any of the relief programs, not being able to get a loan, not being able to get through the Department of Labor, having issues with appealing the amount that the Department of Labor has given to you, please reach out to us. We have services in place to help you get through that. So stay in touch, stay healthy, and talk soon. Thank you, guys.